Hello, we'll be telling you about the evolution and characterization of malware for iOS. My name is Laura Garcia. I have a degree in in computer science engineering. I'm a tester and I'm also an auditor. I have a GitHub with tools and scripts. Those that work with Python, please refrain from visiting me. And those using other things, please come along. I do my best to collaborate with the malware list group in Spain. I guess that some of you have met me before. I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Zaragoza. I have a PhD in computer science, and I am devoted to a number of things that you see there: analysis of binaries and critical infrastructure security. I don't have a GitHub. Well, I have one, but it's empty. I use Bitbucket instead, and if you want to get in touch with me, that's my email address. So, Laura, please go ahead. Oh, sorry, it was me that should start. Never mind. So, as Laura said, we'll be telling you about a study that we carried out on characterization of malware for the iOS. You probably know about this. I found this chart from 2013. I would have liked to include more recent data, but I didn't have the time to put together the details. I actually didn't have data for this in 2015. Anyway, we have 7.2 billion with a B, of smartphones. Smartphones or mobile devices in general. Okay? So there's more devices out there than humans. Cool, isn't it? So we have a very clear trend as regards the number of devices around there. So people working on malware are now focusing on mobile devices. I mean, targeting Windows is a thing of the past. They're now targeting Windows Phone, if they're targeting Windows at all. Regarding market share for mobile devices, this is a chart with the latest information I got hold of. That's the second quarter of 2015. The curve at the top is the market share for Android. Android is above 80% in market share, and that makes sense. I mean, the cheapest phones are Android. That's reason number one. And iOS is well below that, around 20%. Then we have all other operating systems. So what is happening today? Nowadays, Android clearly leads the market. As a consequence, there is a large proportion of malware for Android. In fact, a report I came across when putting together my presentation told me that 97% of malware for mobile devices, in accordance with what Forbes says, is targeting Android platforms. Some facts and figures that we got from reports indicate that in 2012 we were talking about 238 threats or samples, whereas in 2013 we had above 800 samples. That is a very significant increase in the number of threats in just 1 year. I'm including here a reference to a chart where you can find lots of families of malware for Android in different categories. We're talking roughly about 200 families. There will be additional information on this later on. So, what types of malware are we talking about? About what categories could we find in that chart? Well, there's lots of bots, there's lots of unwanted programs, there's lots of fraud, there's lots of advertising, spammers. And since there are so many families and so much malware for Android, obviously a lot of people have developed tons of tools and defense mechanisms. some of them presented at different conferences. And there's also a lot of taxonomies. If you go to that URL up at the top, you see that for each malware there is a description and a list of main features. What else can I tell you? What happens with iOS anyway? That's the URL. That's a very interesting reference. If you're curious about this, we'll try and give you a more or less detailed explanation of the overall situation. So in iOS, only 35 families are known, roughly 35. If we're talking about 200 families for Android and 35 for iOS, it makes sense that people pay attention to the others, to the iOS environment. So academics don't pay as much attention to malware in iOS. How come? Why is there such a limited attention to this? You know that academics live in another world, in a parallel world, unlike Lauda that comes from a company. So why are they not paying so much attention on the iOS side? Well, basically because of market share. From the point of view of criminals, I mean, if we put ourselves in the shoes of criminals, that's the situation. If I want to infect devices to build a botnet, where will I go? Will I go to devices that have 14% market share, or to the other platform that has more than 80% of devices in the market? Well, I'll go against Android because it makes sense. Larger number of devices. And then it's also important to realize that the security model in iOS is very different from the one you can find for Android. They're similar because both have an approach based on permissions, with differences, significant differences in the granularity of those permissions, and both platforms have mechanisms based on protections like ASLR and DEP. But unlike Android, iOS relies on protection from the market itself. What does that mean? What does market protection mean? Well, this is the app review from Apple, the vetting process they have in place in their own application store. When you develop an application, any iOS developers in the room? Very few hands. For Android, that's market share at the end of the day. If you're developing applications and you are distributing them through the Apple Store, you know that you have to pay for a license. 100 euros, and you have to verify your identity. So what Apple does all the time is to keep those applications under control. How? Well, by ensuring that a number of rules are complied with. So applications must be distributed through official markets and rules must be enforced. Is that effective? Yes, but we've seen that there are very few families, so it seems it's working. We've seen cases where the application store didn't operate fully. For example, with that Trojan.
It was configured as a Trojan, and we configured by loading them. Yes, it's free, it's for free, but if I didn't get it wrong, it has to do with the velocity speed issue. From iTunes in China goes slowly. If you look for alternative options, it has to do with infecting compilers and Trojanizing. But the Chinese one starting loading applications with allow you to potential captures of every other elements. It's a funny thing. If you have SDK Trojanize officially, I wonder how can you upload app is doing with some extra code characters. Is that easy? Last year, latest studies said that around 30 or 9 or 40 malware apps into the App Store during last year developed with this framework. Another mechanism that can be used to avoid or to skip this BETO, the betting process, is by using ad hoc provisioning private AIP abuse, compromise iCloud accounts, and enterprise issues. So with this work, with this research, we have classified 35 iOS malware families since 2009 to 2013 regarding these parameters. We consider what are the devices affected, the distribution channels, the infection, the attack goals, and the attack vectors. I want to tell you about more about this taxonomy and classification. Secondly, before talking about iOS malware and these things, I need to tell you about ION security model and its architectures. On the left, you can see the architecture that has to do with the iOS architecture. iOS follows starting chain that verifies the integrity of a low-level code. We secure the boot chain. We verify during this secure boot chain that it's executed upon a valid device, which means on one Apple's device. Very firstly, we first boot the ROM, which is an immutable code that contains the Apple root CAPK, the public key for the, like I said, the root CAPK that verifies that the remaining code is duly signed. It's used to verify the LLV level and signature. The LLV, we got a low-level bootloader, which verifies and executes the next iBoot. Next step, iBoot is in charge of verifying and loading the system kernel, verifies and executes iOS kernel, and iOS kernel verifies and executes full iOS and loads OS plus user partition. Inside, the user partition will see the firmware is signed and will find the individual partitions as well. Regarding applications, different app security layers. The first layer, all applications Apple issued and certificated. So Apple issues a specific certificate. So every application has to be signed by the build person, a certificate issued by Apple after identity verification, because of course they are very dollar-oriented people. At an execution level, you need to know the app sandbox are executed isolatedly, and is also based upon non-privileged user mobile. Another mechanism incorporated is the data protection. Here, a data file associated with a specific class file defining access granularity. That's the point. And other security mechanisms, ASLR, to avoid potential exploits or to be infected code injected. Some notes about the vetting process on iOS security model. We make sure that applications are reliable, there are no breaking down, they perform as expected. If you have to put on this card deck theme, it's not a domino theme, it's free of any offensive material and perform as expected. The application has not to be racist or against religious or prejudice oriented, not at all. It's a set of over 100 rules covering aspects such as functionality, metadata, location, advertising, and so on. The reasons to reject submitted applications. The fact that you are uploading the application does not mean that it's going to be published. Why? Why your applications can be rejected? Because they are, firstly, they may crash on execution. They may include undocumented or hidden features, another reason for exclusion and rejection. They may use private APIs or read data or write out of the boundaries and download an external code. Now examples of bypassing. Um, in being a mainline process, you may use Trojanized SDK, obfuscate private AIPs, or even a very important thing, the abuse of inter-app interaction services, which is a clear example of bypassing the sandbox from the applications. Now, my friends, features of iOS malware. We posed these questions. These Among these 35 families, we tried to sort them out from who are targeting at individuals, who is using this malware. We can make distinguish public or on-sale malware you can buy anywhere. You download it, you pay for that, and you can spy on your children, on your employees, on your wife if you don't trust them. For sale to the public and any of you folks, on the other side, we have distinguished the state-sponsored malware, which is used by government and state intelligence agencies of the factic visible powers of the state to spy on individuals and journalists.
El underground malware, que aquí es el que usan los cibercriminales.
And finally, underground malware used by cybercriminals, which is technically speaking called malware in the while you are navigating, and all of a sudden the bug is inside. This is some of the samples we have considered to be useful. On the left, the 15 samples malware family names for the public selling. The very first dated back to June 2009. The latest one, October 2014. Malware family name, state-sponsored malware. We can take out four examples. I like the most those you can see on the right, underground malware. There's one dated back to November 2009, and there's a bunch of things in between 2014 and 2015. All of them were found on October 2015. My goodness. We knew the date exactly when it was published, the discovery. So we can underline these devices focused on non-jailbroken or jailbroken-based devices. Regarding distribution markets, official markets, alternative markets, which is Excitia, or unknown sources, which are any website you can find on the internet. Infection mechanisms that can be used in these forms and samples. We need interaction from the side of the user that press, okay, yes, we can. Or exploit any vulnerability. Here, they sneak in transparently for the users. Objectives or attack goals, all these samples are included among these 5 characteristics. Spamming, ransom, data theft, fraud, and spying. Capturing private data from users, software spying. The attack vector, as we can see on screen, I could have named him, but okay, I'll do it later. One thing for you to consider, how many of you have ever had an Apple device? Raise your hands. Please. Now, did I say down with your hands now? How many of you have bracketed? No one of you have the device bracketed. There's some case over there. The only brave guy. You're very liar, people. Classification now. Classification of iOS malware. To sum up, the classification of a total of 25 malware families according to the next features: devices, distribution means, method of infection, attack goals, and attack vector. Classification and results is reflected on this table. I will explain it to you. All these documents will be available for you on the internet. All this information will be then publicly published. Regarding classification of iOS malware devices, there are very few little families of malicious software affecting jailbroken devices. Let's please take into account that by having these devices, it's a factor that will increase the risk of being infected. Bear in mind that over the past 2 years, 2014 and 15, malware affecting non-jailbroken devices had flown from Apple Store very recently. Why? Why jailbreaking affects the rate of being infected? Because any person can distribute malign software through repositories, buildbox. Technically speaking, any kind of malware will be sneaking through that. If you don't have the jailbroken devices sponsored by or spying software, they will be looking for doing jailbreaking on your device silently to then inject the malware. Zero-day agents are veterans in cybersecurity, remarking the CEO from Google, offering a lot of money for jailbreaking, characterized by being remotely executed when the user goes on a website, jailbreaking through the Safari model browser. Basically, Pangu team people did not want to participate in this contest because their jailbreaking philosophy is not like this. They prefer doing the jailbreaking through USB because they have the right tools. Bear in mind that depending on the type of malware and the access onto the operating system, it will stop or not. Hacking team from 821, when they patch the vulnerabilities, we'll see later it stopped working. By the way, you can see now that these images on the right, this blue bubble is, you can see spywares sold to the public. The magenta one is state sponsored, and the green one malware on the underground, and the gray bubble are only installed on jailbroken devices. Distribution channels is going to vary depending on the malicious shareware can be injected. Spyware software for the public. You know that an Apple Store, during reviewing and revising the code, does not allow to upload accessing private data from users without the permission and acceptance by the user, because this would be an aggression about the privacy for the user. This is only through down repositories. There are only two tools of solutions for non-jailbreaking devices. I sent them an email. I have a little baby. I want to distribute and monitor her activity. They told me, do you have Apple certificates? Do you download it from Apple Store with iCloud credentials? You can monitor the activity with the iCloud backup. It's the only thing they are selling. Malware sponsored by governments, they will look for social engineering through emails, not in connection with links to websites where you can infect, and then malware underground in order to distribute it. You jump over the Apple Store through Cydia repositories full of malware and alternative loading websites, Chinese websites. Chinese people are the top one here, especially with malware underground. Regarding infection, users faults by installing the malicious app. You explore the vulnerability that is used to infect malware on you due to the failure and the fault of users by using Cydia apps and extensions, by downloading extensions from Apple Store, alternative websites to download video games, social engineering, and the case of bootloader. In this case, they infected your computer with malicious software. As when they detected you connected your mobile phone onto it, it sent you applications to infect you, depending if you have a jailbroken device or not. This attack will be done in different ways. Another attack would be by knowing the credentials. The secretary steals you the mobile phone and they infect you. Regarding iOS malware, we count on over a few amount of vulnerabilities. For no malware, these vulnerabilities can reach at 0.2% by including vulnerabilities used for the Pangutini people to do jailbreaking of their devices. There's a small number of vulnerabilities here. Vulnerabilities used or that can be used to invade devices. Vulnerabilities that allows you to monitor the user's activity. Input inserted on the mobile phone and actions you press on this issue you can see on screen by using expired certificates. You modify the mobile certificates to be before the issuance of these certificates. Pangutini used this to inject the jailbreak, or cases such as Agembo or the Agembo Advanced emulator. Other cases, vulnerabilities. When you have an application, enterprise application, people at the company receiving the application will know that you need to know a provision profile for this application to be installed. There was a vulnerability which allows you to jump over this step, and you didn't exit the provisioning profile. Another vulnerability is that allows you to access the content of another data applications within a directory with their information. In some documents, they accessed what documents are not locally stored, credentials. And then the most known vulnerabilities, the mask attack fixed in iOS 8.4. This vulnerability is due to the fact that Apple did not control the fact that two applications have this very same bundle ID defined when you create an application with S code. When two applications have the very same bundle ID, the denial of services can be taking place. You can simulate legitimate applications with true-night applications with modified extensions. This was done by the hacker team. There were 12 modified applications from Facebook and WhatsApp, Trojanized, in order to be distributed with signable certifications and certificates. This this attacks aims at, as you can see on screen, we analyze as expected malicious software which is accessible to the public and sponsored by governments. What is the objective? We monitor the user's activity and we extract personal information from that. Information such as SMS, emails, locations, our images on WhatsApps, our contact agenda. Oh, funny cases by by government-sponsored government. This is the defense file on iOS recording of common communications file download. Defense file is created by the Grammar group based in the United Kingdom and Germany, devoted to selling cyber intelligence services to government institutions. This is distributed through ad hoc provisioning certificates by Apple, but the only version for FilmSpy requires that the device has the jailbreaking for the functionality to be correctly executed. These recorded communications, downloading out files, locations, GPS, and the cell identifier in the base station. You need to switch up the location. You can be located. First, the hacking team, are you familiar? It's based in Milan, Italy. Last July, their Twitter account was compromised with, a lot of gigabytes of information was stolen. NSA and other agencies are linked with it. Among their tools, they had an Apple-based certificate based upon the vulnerability that allows you to replace legitimate applications. They manipulated and faked certain applications from Facebook and WhatsApp. A monitor tool to keep track of station base and WhatsApp. It costs $50,000. They gave you customer service, support service, and this works for non-jailbroken devices. And the monitoring previous device we saw implied a different thing, and the keylogger could be installed in non-jailbreaking devices. The case of infection on the iCloud operation was an espionage campaign whose targets were diplomats, high positions in companies in Russia, Venezuela, Turkey. The infection was done with jailbroken devices. Messages telling you update your WhatsApp. They updated and they got infected. They capture the agenda, the IPs, the situation, the status, and the state of the Wi-Fi. And in Operation Pawn Storm, the targets were the military contractors and diplomats from the United States and their allies, with solutions to jailbroken devices and non-broken devices, focused on stealing personal information, recording the personal calls, take out screenshots, and so on. This is .5 in my category. .5 attack goes underground malware, which is at the top here. Very first one. Most stuff has to do with data theft. They steal us from our Apple ID. Key Raider stole the Apple ID accounts. It hooked the call when you connect it with iTunes, and they stole your ID credentials. And with this database created with ID credentials, then they offered you applications for you to download from Apple Store things for free. I'm offering you Apple Store applications for free, and then after being stolen from them. This is stealing revenue from advertisements, but coming back to the point of stealing Apple IDs with the SSL craze at Float Baby Panda listens to that going SSL connection and steal Apple ID credentials. The same applies to Xcode Goes, which creates certainly. And I want to mention a specific case of attack. In the advertisements, when people create ads to gain the benefits, they infected libraries where the advertiser ID was hooked to take the benefit from that. The people got infected through Cydia. There were so many noisy about this issue. Fraud. They committed fraud. They stole the Apple ID. So here, through AP buyers, steal users' Apple ID and password and buy apps from the official App Store by victim's identity. Regarding spying software for the underground malware, there are few amounts. For instance, MR8 used against the Occupy Central protesters in Hong Kong was that my messages with Lang. They extract a vast range of personal information, including iOS address book, SMS messages, call logs, GMS identities, geographical allocation by the cell tower ID on device pictures, as well as passwords and other authentication data in the iOS keychain. They stole the identifier from their cell. You think that by removing the GPS locator is not, but no. Regarding ransomware, there are very few. Only found KeyRaider also has built-in functionality to hold iOS devices for ransom. It blocked the device until the point that you had to pay for that. And another ransomware attack, not with malicious software, is one done in Australia. A lot of credential were compromised on the iCloud. So here, previous ransomware attacks remotely controlling the iOS device through the iCloud service, Find My Phone. So they blocked the mobile phone in many people in Australia. Apple said that no, we didn't suffer any breach of our security regarding the iCloud service. It perhaps might be down to some specific malware. Attack vectors, another option. Attacking non-jailbroken devices. How can we infect non-jailbroken devices? As you may know, Apple distributes applications for enterprises and developers outside Apple Store, so developers can install them to test it positively. There are some malware that devoted to obtain certificates, either legally or stolen them to distribute their applications. Please bear in mind that Apple has improved all regarding the enterprise applications on devices. When you earlier got the application, you can press trust, non-trust, install with the provision profile. Now from version 9, you cannot install it. You need to go back to settings, channels on profile and accept it manually. For example, another kind of non-jailbroken attacks has to do with the mass attack vulnerability, which allowed to replace applications legitimized for those with modified extensions to extract information. Important cases, as you can see, the wire lurker or hacking team installs long-lasting third-party applications. It could replace a legitimate application as long as both applications use the same bundle identifier with the given certificates. Because it's funny for me to see that they validate your identity to give you an Apple certificate, but that you are be given to those who are paying for that. Now, the abusing private APIs, Raul commented on that in another firm. So Apple has some non-documented APIs, which prohibited their usage on those applications uploaded on Apple Store. Apple prohibits you from using this functionality unless, if you want to upload an application on Apple Store, because they can extract sensitive information from the device, or you can install components, you can launch them. For example, GXpector has GXpector combines enterprise certificates to get installed in devices. 3 components. The very first component on GXpector is installed with the provision of being distributed through certificates. The second one calls the mobile installation framework on install to launch the next component. So then it used Spring for service to detect what applications are running at the moment, and it executed the one which has been recently installed. This has been done with Raven 2. Those not familiar with Raven 2, it's made up of part of the Radar 2 reverse engineering. Raven 2 allows us to extract metrics and binary information to see the APIs installed. It comes in handy. Regarding libraries, to extract streams from libraries, the headings, all this stuff. Besides, Yami SK did a bypass from Apple Store, because Apple in the review and revision process only checks the libraries you are uploading statically through a static analysis. You are calling libraries privately, API privately, I mean. When you call an object on Objective-C, you bypass it and you inject the class and method in with some tools. They obfuscate the class and methods and only accessible in the time of execution. So here they did, as you can see, source DNA commented to Apple for them to take the right security measures when it comes to reviewing and revising the code.
To give you another example, on another methodology to attack devices without jailbreak is through infected compilers, such as this case. You download the Xcode from iTunes. Developers in China have decided to offer alternative pages. It was found out that there was additional functionality in the SDK. There were at least 40 applications infected. As soon as Apple found out, they got rid of all of them from the Apple Store. Then other examples. Bypassing the Apple Store, old cases. Find and call, a worm that would steal the addresses from your contacts. And LBTM adware. About compromised credentials, I wanted to talk about this because this was the EKI worm scanning the net to find jailbreak phones that wouldn't have any change in their default password. They would upload a photograph of Rick Astley, among other things. Attack vectors for jailbreak phones. We can use applications in Cydia or extensions and infected libraries. You must bear in mind that an application from Cydia will have more permissions than anything you can download from the official Apple Store. You can access the file system. If you have jailbreak your phone, you know what I'm talking about. You probably know about eFile. Your applications in Cydia, in general, have more permissions, and not just the mobile ones. And then you have your model substrate network, or Cydia substrate, which is the infrastructure that is needed to create extensions, also known as tweaks. These are all libraries that will allow us to hook onto the information, modify the information, or add extra functionalities. Here you have the website. Key Radar. This is another example. This is a screenshot with Radare. They would invoke the default functions like the ones you see here. They would hook SSL read and SSL write from the secure framework so that they could modify the ID in the adware, stealing the benefit, so that they could modify the ID of the creator and replace it with the one of the developer for that tweak, amongst other things. Recommendations. This is basic stuff. So, some recommendations from us, focusing on people from the IT department, end users, anyone involved, so that you can protect yourselves a little better against malicious activities nowadays. So what should you do? You should update your applications on the operating system and apply the patches as soon as they come out. You should enable a passcode and the blocking mechanisms for your device. Never install any applications from unofficial or non-trusted sources. And obviously never allowing for applications coming from non-trusted developers or non-trusted enterprise developers. You've got here a list of all the available trust root certificates in iOS 9. It's always a good thing to take a look at this. Then don't click install on a pop-up from a third-party website. Don't say yes to downloading. And obviously you shouldn't trust any unsolicited emails or text messages suggesting that your applications need updating. Obviously you shouldn't grant permissions to those applications that want access to sensitive information like your contacts, your photographs, your location, your calendar. I mean, if you click OK, it's at your own risk, so be cautious about this. And then, where do we download things from? Well, I think it's best to go for the official Apple Store, although there's lots of applications out there. That don't necessarily go through the Apple review call process, but it's always safer to go through the official store. And a final recommendation, beware of plugging iOS devices on a compromised laptop if you're using the USB cable. We've seen cases of infection using the USB port. Other recommendations? Don't jailbreak your mobile phone. Jailbreak involves applying a third-party procedure so that you can use additional repositories. If you do that, be aware you're doing so at your own risk. You have a small screenshot from Cydia, telling you how to get hold of certain packages. So if you decide to go that way, do some investigation on your side. Investigate the repositories, evaluate how the packages are distributed to make sure that you're not using pirated packages. So be careful anyway. Related work. On Android malware, as I said before, there's quite a lot of work. available. There's lots of people that have established taxonomies for Android malware based on the behavior of that malware, on the type of analysis that needs to be carried out to detect it, or on the objectives or goals of that malware, or the current, the future incentives for people using that malware from the point of view of the criminal mind behind it. In this study that I'm quoting here, there was 46 samples analyzed, and 4 of them were iOS malware. This is a paper regarding the attack types and the installation methods, focusing on Android malware, with 1,200 samples analyzed. Yet another paper on unrubies. I guess that you know about this. This is the paper where the tool was introduced. This is a dynamic analysis tool on for Android applications. And last but not least, this is a very significant paper by Spanish investigators, published in a very reliable journal. The paper includes a classification of Android malware based on attack goals, malware behavior, distribution, infection, and privilege acquisition. I can't remember how many samples there are from other mobile environments, but only 9 of those samples were in the iOS environment anyway. Let me also mention the tools that have been developed for that, both as a proof of concept and as real tools. On the one hand, we have iOS, which is a tool for static analysis on iOS applications. The tool tries to detect exfiltration of sensitive information. Then we have Xios, which tries to mitigate attacks based on lazy bindings, as we call them, or abuse of private APIs. And the last one, well, the last ones I would like to mention, these come from the CCS conference, by the way. Computer something else, I can't remember the name. The Better Vetting System, or IRIS. It introduces a new vetting system for static and dynamic analysis. During the same conference, so I guess it was a very trendy thing at that time, another tool was introduced to analyze abuse of iOS sandboxing, the app interaction services. As preliminary conclusions and future work, mobile malware is emerging very rapidly. There's been a very clear upwards trend. Then security in iOS, apart from the typical mechanisms in the operating system itself, relies on the vetting process, and it has been proven, and not just once, as you have seen in the samples of malware that we have mentioned, that this vetting process is not fully reliable. So, as general conclusions, very few samples have been identified for non-jailbroken devices. So congratulations to all of you except you. There's very few samples that actually exploit vulnerabilities in iOS. Less than 0.2%, as Laura said. Very limited amount. That we know of course. And in general, data theft and spying are the most common goals for criminals. Obviously, we have fewer samples, so we might have a bias in our conclusions. What are we expecting for the future? Well, I certainly expect or hope, well, or believe, I don't know what the word would be, but anything. I think there will be many more samples targeting non-jailbroken devices. Why? Well, we've seen it here. People do not usually jailbreak their phone. They're learning. And they've seen the problems there are when jailbreaking their phones. There will be a talk at CESCAM on this. They'll be talking about methods to bypass the code revision procedure. It's the goodies that are giving the talk, by the way. And we would be expecting a larger diversity in the goals that these guys have. Future work we would like to conduct, if we have the time, of course, and the resources. For the time being, I would like to make at least an attempt to find similarities between binaries to do samples for malware clustering. Because I have the suspicion that many of those samples that were made public in 2014 and 2015 share quite a lot of code. We would like to see how much code they share in order to be able to analyze what is happening behind the scenes. And above all, we would like to identify data that can be useful in those malicious binaries so that we could develop better engagement rules. This is a good time, so my turn now. So we would like to thank everyone. We would like to thank the guys in the malware list for their samples. To the Radare 2 community, I would encourage you to use the Radare. If you don't compile it every 2 minutes, you're old. And for the iPhone Wiki people, thank you very much for your hard work, for sharing your views and the results of your research. And to RootedCON, of course, thank you very much for inviting us along. And of course, we would like to thank the Mineco Characterization project.
¿Tenéis alguna pregunta, por favor? Creo que...
Any questions from the floor? We have time for one or perhaps two. No? There are questions. There are questions. Yeah, we can be contacted by email if you're interested. Oh, by the way, I'd like to ask about malware in the Apple Store. If we use a non-jailbroken iPhone and we go to the Apple Store, because I'm not sure about Xcode Ghost, was that only present at a nation site? Could we have downloaded inadvertently malware from the Apple Store? For many of these samples, there's one that hasn't been analyzed yet on Santa Claus, the campaign for Santa Claus. This was distributed from a Spanish site. So you've seen cases, yes, of malware infections recently in the Apple Store. Yes, we have. It was in December of last year. The Santa Claus campaign, focusing Android and iOS. So you could download it, certainly. This is pending work for our next review of the stuff. You know how research goes, yeah? It's iterations. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for the brilliant presentation, very interesting. And there's one question from me. Due to all the malware that is coming out, or that came out in the past, do you think that Apple might introduce limitations into their virtual machine or apply limitations to their own APIs, granting permission to only a handful of companies? To give access or permission to only a handful of companies, is that because of the NSA? I didn't want to mention them, but anyway. Well, I don't want to get into that. I think this is basically smoke and mirrors. They've been collaborating with different institutions, and they've done this just to see how people position themselves. But if Apple sells privacy, we pay for it, so they owe us, because we're paying for it. Any more questions? At the top, there's one more. Please stand up. Hi, and congratulations for your data research. I have to say that I'm surprised at the speed at which manufacturers of forensic devices support the latest releases of iOS. What can you say about that? How come they can progress at such a speed? How can they break into devices so fast? Well, they do it with a backup you download. I don't really understand. I don't want to mention any names. There's several out there. Well, there's a new release of iOS, and one day after that, someone is ready. Yeah, you create an application in the system, and it asks the user, can I share your calendar? Can I share your contacts? You are granting permissions to that application. Without jailbreak, it won't access the entire hard disk. But, for example, the police and the armed forces, they go through their backup. You even apply an application to the backup and then navigate or browse through the device, but that is beyond the scope of that talk. Other questions? In the TAFIT project, for example, this is for CHEMA, really. There will be an academic API so that people can do sampling. Okay, that would be a good thing for you. Yeah, it would. That would come in handy. And if someone wants to do research on this, yeah, an intern. I'm too old to become an intern now. Okay, don't get personal on this. More questions? Nothing? There's one here. A doubt comes to my mind. In Android or in iOS, have you found any malware attacking third-party security measures, apart from the typical phishing text messages? You mean security measures which do not belong to the device itself, like, for example, stealing information from a mobile point of sale? Because it seems that we are using mobile phones increasingly to do all sorts of transactions. There are third-party applications that interact with the mobile phone. So it seems that criminals are not looking for that, to break into third-party security applications that interact with our mobile phone. He's talking about targeted attacks, APTs, targeting iOS. It would be a targeted attack because you need to know what lies behind the scenes. In jailbreaking iPhones, this happens, but you need to have a jailbroken phone. Or privileges on an application that has access to other things. I'm saying this because in the report from Verizon, there was a lot of noise about the dangers, the risks of using our smartphones to do transactions. Then you see security incidents reported, and out of 80,000 incidents, there's not even 10 or less than 20 in any case, where the smartphone has been used as a mechanism for entry. I think there will be a significant increase in the number of security-related incidents from 2015. Executives have their iPads, so the baddies are working on that. A very quick question from me. If I was a really crude baddie and I wanted to launch a huge campaign with a bug for anything, would it be a good strategy to attack all those developers that I can identify in the App Store? So instead of using the device, attacking the developers themselves, because they probably have shitty security applications in their own platform, and hijack their certificate. Would that sound like a good alternative? Well, obviously, if you have a shitty platform in place for security, yeah, I would infect libraries anyway. Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Hisham.